This is Michigan Constitutional Crusader out here in Marshall, Michigan with Spanky Pants. They're holding a public meeting about the mega site where they're going to build a battery plant. They keep changing the location. We had trouble finding it. But we're here now, and we're going to see what's going on.
Meeting regarding this. Find out where it's at.
Where's the meeting held?
Absolutely. If you go past the sink right here, there's an elevator. You're going to go to floor 2. When you step off, you make 3 right turns. You should hear everyone there.
All right, thank you.
Excuse me.
You have a wonderful day.
You too.
Next year, they already have planned to change the Global Health Organization and all the different subcommittees. They already have planned a meeting next year at this time to vote through that there'll be vaccine passports worldwide. 190 nations, not one of them has opposed it.
Really?
One of the women.
The ones that went this,
next year at this time.
where at? Do we know?
It's in Geneva. So
Oh, okay,
it's
gotcha.
all in there, and one other place, Davos. But one of the women from Africa that was there said, well, to make sure that we know this is all gonna work, and it's all like basically a universal approach to pandemic and everything, like how climate control has an effect on our health and blah, 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 blah. And basically she said, we're gonna need to do like a trial run to make sure. And so somebody said, like, basically, they didn't say this from the thing that I heard, but somebody's interpretation. Well, Michelle Bachmann, who's a former senator, is over there reporting. She said, essentially, they'll say we're gonna probably end up with some kind of pandemic.
Oh yeah, there's gonna be another one.
This fall.
Yeah.
In order to
Yeah.
do a dry run.
Well, just like the whole COVID thing was put out 3 years prior to it actually happening, so.
So that's kind of, I don't know nothing about this because they basically said nobody in Congress.
I think one of the best statements that Speaker McCarthy makes all the time to us is, don't worry about what the Senate will do. Let's do the right thing. Then let them worry about what they're going to do with the right thing we sent to them. So, 87,000 IRS agents, we ended proxy voting. We have to show up to work. You can't be in a fishing boat somewhere and call your vote in like we did for the past 2.5 years. We're back to work. We reopen the People's House. You can come visit me. You can wander through the Capitol. You can come to my office without having to be escorted by staff from the police platform. So that's open. We've eliminated the military vaccine mandate. Think of how many of our soldiers, airmen, seamen, Marines resigned, left the military, simply because they're going to be required to take the vaccine. And we were talking about people who we asked to be willing to give their life in combat. And with that, we established a bipartisan China Select Committee that's working. It's bipartisan, but it's looking at every aspect of what we do with China. Trade policy, political policy, and it's amazing some of the things we're finding. It's scary, some of the things we're finding that was just like that. We blocked Biden's WOTUS rule, waters of the U.S., some of you, especially farmers, who had the EPA coming in and trying to take over your land uses because you had a puddle on your farm. And they weren't taking action on Flint until it became so bad and all of a sudden it blew up. We did away with the president's WOTUS rule. We stopped selling of the Strategic Petroleum Reserve to China. We shouldn't be using it for political purposes anyway. But then selling it to China, our enemy. And I say enemy because they told us that they want to take over the United States. And as I understand, and I'm sure some of you military veterans understand, when the enemy tells you what they're going to do, believe them. And I think China has told us. We nullified DC's soft on crime bill, and that was an interesting one, because the president said if we passed, there were two bills. We passed those, he would veto it. Well, we passed them in the House. We even, I think, got a couple, 3 Democrats to vote with us in the House. And then the Senate looked at it, and there were a number of senators who knew that their constituents wanted to vote for it, Democrat senators, and they voted for it. So it passed the Senate, which is a difficult thing to do, to get those 60 votes necessary to even take up a vote. They passed it, sent it to the president, and what did he do? Swallowed hard and signed it. So I think that again is the reason why our purpose is to do the right thing in the right way and not worry about the Senate or the president and just keep going back and back and forth. We terminated the COVID national emergency. The president finally signed it. He knew he had to. Then HR 5, parental bill of rights. Hope you read about that. Basically, I hated the title. And I expressed that as it came through our House Education and Workforce Committee. I don't know any better title, so we couldn't change it. But parents aren't given the rights by the government. God gives the parents responsibilities, and yet we find too many governments, school boards, etc., that we're saying we're responsible for the kids. You're not. We had an attorney general, Merrick Garland. I'm glad he's not on the Supreme Court. I'm glad he's not on the Supreme Court. Aren't you glad that he's not when he says that parents are domestic terrorists? And they're going to school boards and expressing great concerns. I think we ought to go appropriately. I think we ought to go with respect. I don't think we ought to be violent, sure, but I think we ought to be heard as parents. And then my bill, which was rolled into that bill, which was the Protect Kids Act, terrible bill, just no common sense to it at all. I admit that. Tongue in cheek. All it said was, if your child asks his or her teacher to call them by a different pronoun than their biological person, or change their name, or give them counseling on gender transitioning, the teacher or the superintendent has to contact the parent or the guardian and inform them that their child has asked this. Sounds terrible, doesn't it? That I would try to make schools inform the parents. Well, unfortunately, it passed, and it's over in the Senate right now. Simply saying, hey, it's up to the parents to decide. It's up to the parents to deal with this. And we can't let things like this take away the value and primacy of the new. Finally, HR 1. We passed that. Lower Energy Cost Act officially passed. It takes us back to basically, I think I can say it very quickly, the same policy that President Trump put in place when he was in office. Producing total independence from the rest of the world on our energy. We use our own energy resources or our North American resources with our neighbor to the north, Canada. We were exporting resources as well as using what we had. We had gas prices until the COVID hit, below $2 a gallon. Well, that seems a long time ago. And even when President Biden took office on January 20th of 2021, it was still only $2.39 a gallon. It's never gone back. This legislation allowed us to go back and use our own resources to reduce permitting requirements to only those that are necessary, to be able to use resources on federal lands, including in Alaska and the Gulf of Mexico, et cetera, and to be a country that meets our own needs and isn't subservient to that. So we've been busy in the House of Representatives, and look forward to more. Let's open with questions, and how are we going to do that, Dustin?
We have a lot of questions to get through, so we'll get through them. Connie from Marshall writes, why can't Congress work for the citizens and end this budget country shutdown problem?
Well, the country isn't shut down, and we passed a bill to keep it from being shut down. That's the best answer I get. I hope it doesn't sound snarky. We did it. We're only one house, but we are one house, and we passed the bill. Took care of the debt ceiling, and it did significant reform in our spending plan, and it saved taxpayers $4.8 trillion. I think if I were a senator, I'd want to jump on that and run my next campaign on that. So we'll see. We'll see. We're ready and willing at the table. As I said, the speaker is still there. Garrett Graves, representative who has been assigned to do negotiation along with Patrick McHenry, chair of the Financial Services Committee. They and others are in the room attempting to come to a solution. If it doesn't happen, it's because Joe Biden, our president, was unwilling to see the writing on the wall and acquiesce.
James from Burlington writes, energy independence and southern border.
Well, HR 1 was to promote energy independence. We were energy independent. It's not something we were just putting out and saying we hope it'll work. We know it. We know it works because it worked. We were. We had the energy. And we were also the cleanest major company. I think I can say we're the cleanest country in the world that has anything going for itself in manufacturing, farming, et cetera, et cetera. We cleaned up our space with clean natural gas. China hasn't done that. They're building multiple coal-fired plants every week in China. They're building nuclear plants. We're shutting down nuclear plants. We're shutting down coal plants. We're shutting, if our energy secretary has her way, we'll be shutting down natural gas-fired plants as well, and going to wind and solar. And that may be a supplement, but it will never provide us the power needed to be a major country. It won't even allow us to power up our EVs, just like California. So, and then the second part of the question?
Southern border.
Southern border, we passed HR 6, I think it was, or HR 2, which was the Southern Border Control Bill, which again put the policies back in place that were in the Trump administration. Policies that I voted for. Policies that said, our border's open to legal immigrants. We have enough magistrates at the border to hold the hearings in a timely fashion. I forget the exact number of new magistrates President Trump sent to the border to try to deal with it. I was there to see the results of that. One Honduran sitting in a room that 6 months prior, there had been 3,500. He was sitting there waiting to go back on a bus to Mexico under the Stay in Mexico policy, which the Trump administration negotiated with Mexico, where the people would stay there, orderly, waiting there time before the magistrate, which would come in expedient fashion because we beefed up the number of magistrates. So we could hear their concerns, hear what they wanted to be allowed to do, and if found to be right and just and agreeable, welcome to our country, here's what we expect of you. If not, you're going back to Honduras, you're going back to Colombia, you're going back to China, you're going back to Africa, you're going back wherever you came from, but you're not staying here. And so that was our policy, and that's the policy we put through, passed out of the House of Representatives and sent to the Senate. So call your senators. They've got a lot of work to do, because we've given them over 100 days of good work.
Regis from Marshall writes, does the debt reduction debt limit bill passed by the House include reductions in military spending? If not, why not?
It does not reduce military spending to the military personnel. There will be reductions depending on some of the programs, especially if we have reductions in this plan to their woke programs, retraining our military to be woke, training them on ESG, environmental, social, and governance concerns, giving them CRT training, critical race theory training. I don't care what my soldiers think about each other, even, as long as they serve together and do the job of killing the bad guy as quickly as possible. That's what the military's for. I hate to be as blunt as that, but I think a lot of people out there today think that our military ought to be kind and compassionate. We want them to be true patriots. We want them to be people of respect, but the respect of the rule of law and freedom. And when necessary, to be used in the most lethal force on the face of this earth to stop the bad guy. Not the good guy, bad guy. So yeah, there'll be reductions, there are reductions in our proposal in those areas. But what's being put out wrongly by my colleagues on the other side of the aisle is that we are cutting Veterans Administration benefits. No, we aren't. There's no reductions. In fact, in the budget that's being worked on right now in the House, where it starts, there are increases to veterans. Social Security, no reductions. No reductions. Medicare, Medicaid, no reductions, except if you're able-bodied, employable, without dependents, you gotta get a job to get your Medicaid. Those are the only changes. Thanks for asking the question.
Jerry from Marshall writes, FBI, DOJ, and IRS interference with elections need to reorganize and to make serious penalties for interference.
I agree. I agree, and if necessary, I think we may need to kill the FBI and start all over again with something that'll work. There are good FBI agents. I don't say that just to pander to them. There are good FBI agents. But their leadership has gone sour. And when we see now the Durham report that was slower than a glacier, but finally came out, and we see what Christopher Wray, Comey, and others did, not were conjectured to do, but did, in affecting the election of the President of the United States, and hiding things about others, you gotta be concerned. ATF is not doing what it's supposed to do. Hindering First Amendment liberties, not saving kids at school or any other place. CIA may still be doing basically a good job. Well, they're offshore. Finding out what's going on with bad guys. And I've done a lot of them overseas. But FBI leadership, if vote were called today to abolish the FBI, I would vote for it. Hope that doesn't scare some people. I think it's sometimes it just means we wipe it out and start over again with what's necessary to carry out law enforcement appropriately and especially support our frontline police force that's taken an awful, unjust beating over the past several years.
Randy from Marshall writes, is there any chance of earmarks being approved in the upcoming budget, and how you propose to change and improve Social Security moving forward?
Well, there will be earmarks. We've gone back to legislative directed spending, where we have just 15 earmarks that I can submit from grant requests. We've got 2 from Calhoun County that we were able to get in as justified because they have a federal nexus. That means any place in the United States, this same type of project would be available for them as well. And generally, to meet requirements coming from the federal government. So, in many cases, there are unfunded mandates which shouldn't be approved. But this gives us the opportunity. So there will be earmarks. Every member has an opportunity to submit those. And through our office, we get requests from all 10 counties that are in my district about requests. And then picking through those as best we can in consultation with the Appropriations Committee leadership, we figure out what ones have the best opportunity of achieving. Let me say this about earmarks. I've never been opposed to earmarks. I've always been opposed to pork barrel earmarks. There's a difference. I believe, and as I've become a little longer in the tooth with my new district, especially the west part of the district, I have a little advance opportunity because for 4 years I represented 2 terms, I represented Calhoun County. But as I become aware of all of the issues in my entire district, I think I have a better handle on what is valid, valuable, and usable than some bureaucrat in Washington who decides what we're gonna spend, whether it's on road or infrastructure, broadband, pipelines, water systems. It's my responsibility to know what my district is, what it needs, what it does, and how it handles certain things. So to say this funding ought to go toward Marshall because it meets the federal nexus and it deals with some of the requirements that the federal government has put on it. I have a better ability to say that than the best named bureaucrat somewhere in the bowels of government. And the final question.
How do you propose to change or improve Social Security moving forward?
Well, number one, we have to make it secure, and I have legislation I've introduced again. I would establish a lockbox that says all Social Security dollars that go in, your FICA payments, remember that's a tax too. All of those can only be used for Medicare or Social Security purposes. Can't be used even to balance off a debt. It has to be used only for those purposes. While I got the chance, let me say this as well. Let's encourage births in this country. When originally Social Security went into place, I'm told 141 people were there paying for one Social Security recipient. Now it's down approaching 2 paying for 1. If we don't turn it around, start having more people born in this country to ultimately become workers, to pay for Social Security if it's still around, we have a real problem. Besides that, I think the wealth of the nation begins with its people. And I think for too long, and I'm getting on a rabbit trail, for too long we've denigrated the family unit, and why it's necessary for a functioning society that leads in the world. And so you heard me on that issue, and Kevin, I'll take you to it, right?
County for Battle Creek writes, what can be done about opening up the fossil fuel pipeline again?
Come to our senses. Pass HR 1 in the Senate, send it to the President, and somehow get him to sign it. I have no trouble with wind and solar where they're appropriate. I had no trouble with hydrogen. I was at a hydrogen-powered electric furnace, steel furnace, in Luleå, Sweden, last year, when 3 members of the Conservative Climate Caucus, I'm one of those. Hope I didn't scare you by saying I'm a member of the Climate Caucus. It's a Conservative Climate Caucus. We went to Belgium to talk with the parliamentarians at the European Union about this very thing, of the impact of going too far on the Green New Deal type approach. I was there the week the Ukraine war started. We were with the European Union parliamentarians the first part of the week, then went up to Port of Rotterdam and saw some things going on there with hydrogen and wind power. Saw the huge ship, the largest ship in the world, that laid Nord Stream 1 and 2 for the Russians. Saw that green-powered electric furnace. I worked at U.S. Steel, Southworks, in number 2 electric furnace, so it was very interesting for me to see a process doing the same thing that I did with coal-fired power, lighting up our electrodes at our furnace. This was done by hydrogen. Clean, green hydrogen. Why could they do it? Because the resources were available. northern Sweden, up near the Arctic Circle, had all the wind and all the hydropower that they needed. That was the starter for the hydrogen. Worked perfectly. That's innovation. So we change the means by which we power ourselves through innovation, not by government mandate. Getting back to using fossil fuels right now, fossil fuels cleaned up our air with clean natural gas. And I told Jennifer Granholm, our Secretary of Energy, just 2 weeks ago in a hearing, don't take away my wife's gas stove. And we had bills on that this week, in fact, prohibiting the simple taking.
Did she understand that?
She tried to say, nobody has ever said we're gonna take away gas stoves. That's just, we just want people to think that direction and find a better way. Well, you know for a fact that to fire up those electric stoves, when you're also trying to charge your EV, if you're in California, you're browning out. And the governor's saying, don't charge your cars up for the next couple of weeks at night because we don't have the power to do it. So anyway, we're gonna keep pushing for innovation. I said I'm part of the Conservative Climate Caucus. We went to Egypt to the big COP27 where all the climate people come in and say the world is gonna be done in 12 years if we don't do this, that, and the other thing. And they fly in their private jets, Al Gore, John Kerry. I spoke with John Kerry there. He was surprised that there was a Conservative Climate Caucus. We invited him to meet with us and he hasn't taken us up on that yet. Innovation will allow us to have all the energy we need, and I believe to use fossil fuels and use them well, and meet the needs of all, whatever transportation, whatever equipment they need for doing the jobs they need to do. We can do that. We've shown that in our American history, and we've cleaned up ourselves over and over again, better and better. Should we not keep doing that? Sure. But every little bit extra cleanup, the amount of cost that it is in comparison, is huge. Germany, France, all of the European countries at the European Union meeting where we met, the three of us talking to those parliamentarians, who exclaimed that they had all the power they needed to take into concerns. We asked them about base power. They put their head down a little bit and said, we've got that met too. And then we asked the question and we knew the answer. Where does your base power come from? Russia. By the end of the week, that was a problem. And to this day, it's a problem.
Not to belabor the energy issue, but one more nuance. David writes, energy costs, why are we paying more between the hours of 2 p.m. and 7 p.m. when they say we have lots of power?
You'll have to ask the energy providers, consumers, ET and others. It's again a mechanism by which they can control and encourage people in the usage of their energy. But if we allow, and I can be corrected by consumers or DTE or Duke Energy or any of the others if they want to. But if we allow them to do what they know they can do and they need to do, with the energy sources needed to make the power necessary to continue moving us forward, I think they could do it. But the government mandates, the penalties that are being proposed, have encouraged them to do things that don't make sense. It's my own personal opinion. But I've had a lot of those discussions with our energy providers, ITC and others that do the transmission. We don't have the resources to do what's necessary in the coming days if we keep going the direction we're going. And we're going to go to lessen our capabilities as opposed to increase. That'll be the first time in history we do that.
Rebecca from Marshall writes, when are you going to oppose funding of Ukraine?
Well, I've done that twice with 2 bills that were put forward with all sorts of other garbage things in it. But it comes down to the point. Do you want Putin to resurrect the Soviet Union again? I was one of those that numerous times went under the desk at school or into the hallway up next to the lockdown. And as I got older, I began to think, it's nuclear. What's gonna save me under the desk? I don't live that way. I don't live that way. And you got Ukraine fighting a battle for us. You gotta watch what you're listening to or viewing. Of people who have never been to Ukraine, who haven't gone on fact-finding missions like I did on my own dime, because the speaker wouldn't allow any Codels to go to Ukraine. So on my own dime, with parliamentarian friends that I know from Ukraine, snuck me across from Krakow to Lviv, then on a night train ultimately to Kyiv. Bucha region, Irpin, Hostomel airfield to see how they held off a crack Russian airborne attack there, trying to get that airfield to get control of Kyiv. And they stopped them with 22 rifles, shotguns, and a few high-powered rifles as well, out of sheer commitment to their country. Who, when I asked several of the commanders there, these are basically National Guard commanders, I said, you know, concerns I have for my people back in the United States is that how do we know that the money that we've sent for military as well as humanitarian relief is getting where it's getting? I said, I think humanitarian relief, when I've talked to the head of Samaritan's Purse, some of you know Samaritan's Purse, does great work all over the world. They were almost bombed out themselves in the one situation. I found out, yeah, the dollars are getting to them, they need more to deal with the amazing human needs that are there. But the soldier said to me, this colonel, he said, well, it's no problem. You want to know what we're spending on military, that we're using the dollars you send, do what you used to do. I said, what was that, sir? He said, give us a military attaché. We closed down the embassy, which took our military Marines that are in all of our countries where there's an embassy. There's an assigned detachment of Marines that are there. Give us our military attaché, he can follow us around. We'll show him where we're spending it. I said, as simple as that. That's how we used to do it. So I went back to the appropriate entity, the Armed Services Committee, and the Appropriations Committee, and I informed them, the leadership of those committees, of what I heard. We have a military attaché in Ukraine now following them around, getting the information. And then people say, well, it's a corrupt nation. What about the United States? Do we have corruption? So, I mean, that's where I'm at. I'm not going to support a bill for Ukraine funding if it's attached to all sorts of other garbage spending. And I haven't. I supported one spending plan, an initial one, for Ukraine. But I would support another. Because I know if they're fighting, we're not. If Putin is losing, which he is, we're winning. And we've also made agreements with NATO, and we made agreements, Trump specifically had promised to Zelensky himself, that we would support them and we would never do what happened in Crimea, where Obama gave them blankets and not military equipment to push back Russia when they could have. Trump, if you remember, gave Ukraine defensive and offensive weapons. And Putin didn't push any further into Crimea or Ukraine while Trump was in office. I stand on the side that's against Putin.
Mark writes for Marshall, why limit notice of this meeting to those who agree with you?
Why limit this meeting?
I think he disagrees with you, so that's...
How do you get in? Anybody can come to this meeting. Anybody can come to this meeting, or any meeting that I have. We don't go through the list and find out who are Republicans or Democrats, or independents. We don't do that. We send out information to an area. You know, I could do these big entire Calhoun County event. We could do it in downtown Battle Creek or something. All that turns into is a lot of people that don't have a chance to have their issues addressed. We do it smaller meetings like this, within townships, within municipalities. And I'll do probably again this year 70 live town halls. Name me one other legislator in Congress that does that.
You should put that in your notice, if you disapprove people that don't agree with you, come to these meetings.
I should put that in?
It's in it. I can read it to you.
No,
You're
it's not.
proactive in discouraging anyone who disagrees with him from attending.
Who put that up?
I don't know.
It's not me. Think that guy didn't come to my office.
Frankie wouldn't approve that.
No, that didn't come, we couldn't get Frankie in Washington, which is nonpartisan. Wouldn't have.
I don't know what came on myself.
You give that to my staff and we'll try to find out who did that. That's propaganda.
Carol from Marshall Rights.
Put this out clearly. Anybody can come to my town hall meetings. Anybody. If you've been to some of my town hall meetings in my last district, that surrounded Ann Arbor on three sides, East Lansing had the veteran communities for the professors at U of M and Michigan State and state government bureaucrats. And seeing the signs, you can come to my Jackson office and see a picture there of people with signs, even quoting scripture against them. We've had some hot meetings, and I'm not opposed to that, as long as you understand if you disrupt the meeting, it's your time. I'm gonna stand here for that hour anyway. So, no, I mean, if that was what you got from somebody, that's not us. We want anybody and everybody.
Carol from Marshall writes, McCarthy has a public statement, but reality is different, i.e. heard on the 700 Club, bad policy. Not sure exactly what you
I
mean.
don't know what 700 Club said. What did they say? Who wrote the question?
They spoke about the, public thing that McCarthy put out, but he said in reality they didn't have any proposal. So,
What's the proposal on?
I think they're talking about the debt ceiling.
the debt ceiling,
We passed one.
okay,
I don't know
well,
how 700 Club would even say it.
okay,
I mean, that's again, you gotta watch what's put out there, and who's saying it. The 700 Club is a Christian program, but no 700 Club reporter talked to me.
okay,
And I voted for that bill on April 26th, the Limit Saves Grow Act, that Kevin McCarthy was pushing and got all but 3 of our colleagues to vote for it.
okay.
We passed the Senate, sitting there right now, can be read. Great bill. And if they're saying that Kevin is negotiating some changes in that, well, I don't doubt that might be the case, because in order to get something across, you always have to compromise somewhere.
Yeah.
And the question I will ask Kevin at the end is, what compromises did you ultimately agree to? And then I'll ask him myself, can I accept that? If I can't, I'll be voting against it. If I say, I'd rather it was stronger, but this is realistic, I'll vote for it.
Carol from Olivet writes, please give a report of what the representative's plan is to oppose the WHO and WEF, etc., regarding the established plan for a global health response to future pandemics and health crises. Presently, there is a plan to impose vaccine passports and other devastating loss of freedoms, including climate change imposing on our health. No representative has opposed this.
The Republican majority has opposed it. We did it in resolution. We will not bow down to the World Health Organization. We've opposed the president with a Congressional Review Act that we passed, calling for him not to accept WHO standards for anything. We don't recognize them. We see them as part of China, the Chinese Communist Party, let me be specific. And, no, we will establish our own healthcare requirements in the United States. That's the Republican position, that's the resolutions we've adopted. Whether it gets to the Senate or not, or to the President, doesn't make much difference. But we're not gonna let WHO tell us what to do.
But can we pull out? We need to pull out.
I'd love to pull out. I'd love to pull out, that'll take a change of administration. Elections have consequences, so let me say this. If you're concerned about what went on in 2020 and 2022, show your concern by getting more like-minded individuals to the polls this next time. So the cheating that will go on will be overcome by the numbers. We stand against those policies. So, and then we'll do our best to change. But you can say we're doing our best to change some of those election policies. That still comes from the state legislature. It comes from our governor, our Secretary of State and Attorney General. And if you haven't noticed, I think we got a problem there.
Justin writes, can consumers, others force townships to allow solar fields? Michigan Townships Association lawyers tell us we will be sued if we don't modify our ordinance to allow construction of solar fields.
I believe in local control. And my advice to any township or municipal governments that doesn't want solar fields is to say soon.
Good word.
Now, I believe in individual landowner rights until they have a negative impact upon the surrounding community or surrounding landowners. I live on a township line myself. Township 30 feet across the road from me has no zoning requirements for buildings on properties, if it's your own land. I live in a township where I had to go through county health department, the township zoning board, in order to tear down a barn on my property and put up a grandma cottage for my mother to live in for 13 years. Across the road, I could put a trailer up. Where I was at, had to do perk tests, all the rest of the stuff, even though my 88-year-old or 83-year-old mother at the time used a lot less water than my 18-year-old daughter. It was a way of college. So, I mean, that's what I'm saying. I don't think we abuse, but doggone it. If a local unit of government standing for the majority of the people says, no, we are not going to change the zoning requirements to put up whatever, marijuana facility or a solar field or a wind tower field. I think they ought to have that right, and if they're going to be sued, that's where the citizens have to back them up.
Rick from Marshall writes, and this is the last one because you have a WILX interview with regard to the shortage of chemotherapy drugs. So that's a hard stop.
Yeah. Debbie Dingle and I authored a letter to the FDA when we found out concern about there being not enough cancer therapy drugs. And most significantly, the #1 chemo drugs for things like breast cancer, lung cancer, etc. We got all the rest of our Michigan delegation to sign on as well, so it's a bipartisan letter that went out. The two of us sit on Energy and Commerce, which has the medical field involved in our purview. And so we've asked a number of key questions about why this is the case, what's happening, what they're doing about it, when we expect to have results, and what we're doing about to encourage production of these drugs on our shores. case, the majority of them were being produced in India. FDA did what it was supposed to do, and found out there was some significant concerns with the production processes at the Indian facility. They shut down the operation for receiving those drugs for a while. That's back up again. But there should be an effort, from what we learned from COVID with China, how many of our pharmaceuticals are in China. They're not here. We have to control it. So that's the reason for our letter that was sent out just the other day. We don't have a response back yet, but it's pretty important when you think of, I don't want to scare you with this, but I'll tell you the truth, that Oklahoma Hospital would have to determine in certain cases potentially which person is the most priority to receive the top drug and which other would get the second drugs. It's not the hospital's fault or the doctor's fault. It's the fact that we don't have the drugs here. So that's what we're pushing on to become the solution, so we can get back up that whatever your doctor thinks you need best will happen.
And there are some additional questions on solar and local control, and then obviously the Ford mega site. Rick from Marshall writes for the last one, how do you plan to address the Chinese encroachment in American industry?
Well, number one, I think we ought to cut it out. Number one, I don't think we should have Chinese to set up companies, entities, buying farmland, buying manufacturing facilities, putting up their own facilities. And we're talking about CCP. I'm not talking about individual Chinese, but any individual Chinese person that is a business person that's setting up a business in the United States has to sign on a contract with the CCP that they will report back any intelligence they gather, any information they gather, back to the CCP. So when I hear about a Chinese entity on contract with Ford Motor Company, Big Blue Oval, that's sitting 15 minutes from a drone site, a crucial drone site in Battle Creek at the Air National Guard base, my antenna goes way up. And I know there was a non-disclosure agreement that was signed that Ford required to be signed. Well, Ford and I have had a chewing on opportunity. Well, I guess I was chewing on Ford, saying, what are we doing? I mean, you've bent down to government mandates on EV, and you know that your consumers aren't all in for it yet. You know that there are better ways of doing it, through hybrid, for instance. Get people used to that. See if there's a better way. But then, because you want to have a battery that's built that will allegedly be cheaper, it won't be as powerful, but it'll be cheaper, so you can put it in some cars so more people can buy those cars, which is laudable, except for the fact that the only place you can get that is from a Chinese communist-controlled company that'll bring their people here, be on site for upwards of 10 years or more. I got concerns about that.
What's going to happen?
I like 2,500 jobs. I like 2,500 jobs. But there are points in time that I think as Americans we have to be wide-eyed that there are dangers. So we can't grow. So we're going to continue
help us
pushing.
get the EPA involved so we get ahead of the pollution with this experimental plant.
Well,
We need some help. We're not going to.
Need help.
that's why we're here. We will assist in any way possible when we get the push from the local units of government. Let me tell you what I'm constrained with, the same thing you are. I'm constrained as being a general citizen in regards to what's going on in Marshall. I'm not a resident of Marshall. I have no control over your local government units. That's the control.
We're asking for EPA to look at this experimental plant where there's going to be lithium transported into the community.
I can tell, I gotta get on a TV interview that's already scheduled, but let me tell you this. I'm open to doing anything I can on this. The EPA will be here. They will be here, I promise you that. They will be here moderating all the construction, the processes, and all the rest.
Can't even get a hold of them.
They can't do it before it's even built.
Yes, they can.
There's
This
nothing
is
to
an
look at,
experimental plant.
but there's nothing to look at. They've gotta have something with, I've dealt with it, I know what they're gonna say. We've gotta have something to look at. So, even before the,
Thanks, Simon. Thank you.
USDA do something for
I'll
us.
tell you what, we look forward to having other opportunities here. Don't hesitate to contact your office, you see my.
USDA could help.
Fun.
Y'all don't leave with anything in your draw. This is going live right here. Come right up and tell people anything you gotta say. Right over.
They came here for help, but all they didn't get no help. From the federal government.
Of course not.
We have a